Welcome to DAO Deep Dives, where we interview DAO founders, core DAO contributors, and everyone else who works on the periphery of decentralized autonomous organizations.
Fantastic. So let's just get right into it. Real brief before we dive into the deep end on the technology side and the product of what you're building. Just introduce yourselves real quick. Ben, maybe you want to take it first?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Ben Su, co-founder of Capita. Before founding Capita, I was working as a corporate securities lawyer here in Toronto. By the time I was 2021, I was friends with Aaron and also our another co-founder, Nick, for a while. And we noticed the whole trend in DAOs, and that's why we got together. So in summary of who I am, I have a securities law background, I have a science background, and now I'm building DAOs.
I'm Aaron Song. I have a master in computer engineering from University of Waterloo. So I worked before as a software engineer at various kind of different companies. And eventually during pandemic, I quit my job and I wanted to start my own company.
Cool. So Ben, let's stay with you. And a question that we ask all our guests is, what is a DAO? And really, we're just getting to like your own interpretation. You're in the space, like you think about DAOs a lot. You probably boiled it down into your own mind, or there's something that motivates you to work in the space. So what is a DAO to you?
I like to take a first principles based approach to answer this question, right? DAO, first letter, D, decentralized, autonomous organization. To me, what decentralized means is that, hey, like there's no central entity or there's no central leadership or select group of people, the elites, dictating what the organization does, right? And then it has to be autonomous. What that means to me is autonomous means that you need to have some sort of like technology in place to make sure that the operation of the organization is functioning in accordance to the design, right? So it like group chat is not autonomous, right? But a DAO governed by smart contracts on virtually out of its function or operations. To me, that sounds autonomous, right? And lastly, organization is just a group of people, right? So that's my interpretation of what a DAO is.
So I'd love to going towards your organization, Capita. How did you kick it off? What is the motivation behind it? What do you guys do?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a first stab at it. At the end of 2021, we actually, at the time, we wanted to start a litigation financing DAO. Because at the time, working as a lawyer, I know that in the legal space, in the access to justice sector, money was being weaponized. So if you're talking about the Davis versus Goliath type of lawsuits, it's always people with the fattest pockets that will have the upper advantage of having their version of justice, right? While everybody else who didn't have the financial resources would be getting an unfair treatment. And of course, being entrepreneurs, when you see a problem, you try to solve it. So at the time, I called up Aaron and I asked him, hey, Aaron, back in law school, I did a lot of research on securities for the DAOs, for the ICOs, kind of give me some update on where the technology is. So Aaron actually studied cryptography, right? As he mentioned, at U Waterloo. We had a lot of conversations on it. Then we realized that, hey, look, if we want to build a litigation financing DAO where people contribute capital to the DAO and people decide which case to finance. It could be, for example, the lawsuit against the big pharma who caused the opioid crisis. Imagine the patients, they're not rich people, most people with the opioid addictions. Aaron did a thorough search of available tools. There was DAO House, Aragon, and many others. We realized that the governance design we had at the time would not be able to be built on any existing platform at the time. So Aaron was like, okay, we need to build this thing ourselves, or nobody else would build it for us. So essentially, that's where the inspiration came from. And then we realized that, hey, look, if we build this tool that can help us to spin off a litigation financing DAO, then many other DAOs could use it, especially the many other investment DAOs. It doesn't have to be just litigation financing. It could be startup investing, or it could be any other types of asset class. So that's where this whole Shopify for DAOs, Shopify for investment DAOs, that's where the inspiration came from.
Hey, Ben, what is a default compliant investment fund?
Yeah, that's. I can tell you guys definitely did your research. I love what you're bringing up. This actually gets my heart rate up and gets me a little excited.
Nice.
Yeah. So here's the thing. So when I first got exposed to the Web3 space, it was during the 2016, 2017 bull cycle. So that was like the whole boom of ICOs, right? So at the time, I was in law school. I interned for this venture capital firm out of Silicon Valley, and I basically spent the whole summer at the time studying what these ICOs are. And when I headed back to law school, I read a lot of court materials, state attorney general reports on these things. So what I found was that majority of these things were offsides. They were offside on securities law. If you're if a duck quacks, if something that quacks like a duck walks like a duck, it is a duck. If you're doing things that meets all the requirements of the Howey test, you are a security. And I think it's, and also I think it's people should understand that security laws are enacted for a reason. And that is number one, fairness to protect investors, right? And number two is efficiency, fairness and efficiency, right? So what default compliance means is that we want to change the perception of the society on Web3 finance, where everybody thinks Web3 is like breaking the law, breaking the securities law, and SEC wants to crack down on it. Basically, we want to say that there is a way to unleash the superpower of DAOs or superpower of crypto or Web3 by being compliant. And so this is the beauty of having a Web3 engineer and a lawyer, well, two lawyers working on the same team, is that we bake a lot of these compliance features into our smart contract. So we want to make it a product so that it would be impossible for customers to break securities law, right? So that's what we mean by default compliant.
Yeah, really cool. Two more things come to mind. I was reading Twitter earlier, and an account I follow said chains are the new smart contracts. And I swear I've been thinking about that all day. And I think really it's just meaning that I think I didn't even read into it or see the comments or anything like that, but I almost guarantee they're talking about sharding solutions and individual shards and having essentially dApps that are just the shard and that's all it exists for. So it reminds you of something like Cosmos or something where each thing is its own individual blockchain, essentially. Have you thought about that approach, or is it a very smart contract forward approach for your specific product?
Yeah, I can jump on this, and I think from day one we asked this question: which chain should we build on? And I think at the time we look at the mainnet out like layer twos, and I think I told Ben and Nick, hey, there are gonna be a lot of L2s in the futures. We might run our own L2s or L3 layer three. Actually, I think Arbitrum, those guys are actually working on it, so that they build like a different kind of another level on top of layer two. So I think the eventually my vision is for every kind of a application or like a domain, they should run their own chain. It does not matter if it's a layer two or even layer one. Of course, if you run a layer one, there's a lot of interoperability kind of issues around there. So I think I'll see more higher layer blockchain there because it just does not make sense for a high frequency trading kind of DeFi protocol to compete with, for example, a trade like an NFT trading, or just someone want to send a few ETH to his friend. You don't want to just compete with those like DeFi high frequency traders.
Yeah, and I think getting technical here is totally acceptable and would be encouraged. Like, how are you encoding jurisdictional compliance via smart contract? I think would be super cool to hear. Even just like a 10,000 foot view of that would be really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I'll give you an example, right? So in certain security sales, you have to restrict the transferability on a secondary basis, at least for a year, right? And then we knock on Aaron's door. We say, hey, Aaron, can you bake that feature into the token that people will be getting? So that so you're restricting the transferability of those tokens for a year to satisfy the SEC's lockup requirement, right? That's one thing. The other thing is when you're issuing prospectus exempt securities in private placement exemption, right? You have to strictly work with the accredited investors, right? There's very creative ways that Aaron and the team of engineers came up with to solve that problem, right? For example, issuing accredited investors NFTs, and only the crypto wallets with these accredited investor NFTs, which have been KYC'd, only they can be allowed to purchase a certain restricted securities or security tokens. So that's another example of how we bake in the compliance features into the smart contracts.
Killer. Love it. So let's jump into something maybe a bit more fun for you guys to like riff on. I was wondering if you guys are familiar with syndicate.io and how you might compare to those things.
I think the fundamental, like Ben said, it does not suit our needs. So one of the things is they didn't have a kind of on-chain governance. It's still everything was done off-chain, and they help you issue tokens. It's like, hey, you don't need to find a blockchain developer to issue you tokens. But the tokens had no associated kind of rights, or they couldn't vote. Of course, you can vote on Snapshot, but that doesn't really mean you have the right. So everything is still they have a treasury. The treasury is controlled by a multi-sig, not by all the token holders. It's still like a little bit centralized, but I do think they help a lot with the kind of the traditional investors. Have a legal entity. They can do a lot more things than just a pure Web3. I don't know, a group without any kind of legal entity. They couldn't do that much except for the DeFi protocols.
So I want to jump in here real quick because this is super interesting. This is actually quite a complex topic, right? So for anyone who has not that's not a word, hasn't dove, that doesn't sound right either, did not dive into kind of the world of investing, and especially decentralized investing before, there is many gray or black or red areas in the legal space specifically, right? But you just mentioned controlling the fund or controlling funds through a multi-sig versus token holders. Get into that a little bit from a legal perspective. How does that work? How do you make sure that that fund is compliant if you give every token holder basically a voice in it?
I love that question. I just want to say that it's definitely, I can tell you guys are really deep into the DAO space because these are literally the questions we talk about at this office, we draw out on the board. So first of all, I just want to answer your question by building on what Aaron was saying. A lot of other token projects, for example, you mentioned Polymath, right? These tokens, these ERC20 tokens, they represent the function of as a record of ownership, right? But we think that token smart contract can do much more than just functioning as a token of ownership. It's more than just a record. It could be literally, you can turn the smart contract into a sophisticated architecture and then turn it into your operating system. It's like your MacBook computer operating system. On the fund side of things, I would say this, as a lawyer, Nick and I, we used to write out the operating agreements, shareholder agreements for companies, limited partnership agreements for the GPLP, venture capital funds, and that, right? So within those paper agreements or PDF agreements, you would say, hey, the LPs, they have this ownership interest, they have that ownership right. When we encounter certain decisions, this is how we will vote and come to a consensus for the partnership or for the fund to make a decision on. But what we're saying is that Nick and I, we're still licensed lawyers, but we don't write paper-based contracts anymore, at least not like in the traditional sense. But rather, we work with Aaron. We turn that traditional fund LPA, limited partnership agreement, into smart contract. So for example, we can say that, hey, each LP is entitled to this vote on this particular matter, and GP would have a different set of rights in terms of governance, right? So we bake that into the smart contract, and that when an opportunity comes for them to make decisions, they can participate in accordance with the operating agreement, which is drafted in smart contract, and they can vote with their tokens. So essentially, that's how we're doing things. And in terms of compliance, letting LPs having a voice, whether if that's compliant or not, I think at the end of the day, the compliance problem really is from a securities law perspective, it really is about the government's legislative objective, which is to create a fair and efficient market. So I think that as long as you're playing within the framework of securities law, you make it fair for people, right? And the whole you and to be honest, I think like what we're building is actually advancing that particular legislative objective. For example, on Capita's protocol, you wouldn't be able to have rogue actors like SPF who controls, say, a pool of money and move that money somewhere in violation of the operating agreement. You cannot do that. Aaron's smart contract would not let you do that. But rather, if you, in your LPA, you say, hey, I need this much approval from my LPs in order to move this much amount of money, you would have to go through that process and get the necessary votes on chain in order to execute that transaction.
Yeah, certainly. So essentially enforcing as much of these very hard to understand legal texts in all of these different jurisdictions as possible through smart contracts. And so I keep coming back in my head to comparing it to the traditional VC fund model. Say, let's pick AngelList. I went through the process of setting up an AngelList fund before with our DAO, and you have a GP LP structure, and you have certain limitations or certain barriers you have to cross to ensure that you're compliant, right? Give us an understanding for our listeners who might be more familiar with that model, how that works on Capita or how it will work depending on where you're at with the product at this point. Can anyone just start a quote unquote fund through Capita, or what are the requirements for your GP who would be whoever starts it? Or is it even a fair comparison to make to a GP in that case?
Yeah, so it's funny because in my background on my whiteboard, you probably can't see it, but we literally drew the operating model of AngelList, and we asked ourselves, hey, can we use smart contract to build a smart contract based AngelList? And the answer is yes. So I think the beauty of the smart contract operating system that we've built is that it comes with a lot of, I'd say, customizable governance features. So for example, we have a multi-class token that we have multiple token standards that we're using, ERC20, ERC721, ERC1155. So each of these tokens will give you different rights, right? So for example, we can separate the DAOs token into governance tokens, essentially give you more governance rights in how to operate into operating a fund. And then we also have investment tokens, which have limited governance rights, but gives you the control of the ownership interest in the asset that you're entitled to as an LP, right? Essentially, what we would do is we would look at the LPA of your fund, right? We would say LP is entitled to this, LP is entitled to that, and GP is responsible for making this decision on capital allocation, this and that. And we can bake those governance rights into the smart contract. And you don't even need to code it. It's literally in the dashboard that we built before you launch the DAO. You can set an approval threshold. You can set a quorum threshold for these decisions to be made. And another thing I want to mention is that because we're building with smart contracts instead of paper-based contracts, it's actually, I would say, arguably, it's easier to do it than on AngelList. Why? Because as a lawyer, I can tell you, when you have a 30, 50-page legal agreement, you probably, like, the most important portion of the agreement is probably only occupying 2 pages. The remaining sections are literally talking about what happens if you don't do this and what happens if you don't do that, right? Limitation of liability, blah, 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 the boilerplates, right? So what smart contract is doing is that, hey, we want to make it impossible for you not to follow the agreement. So you actually save a lot of costs in terms of trying to prevent breaches from happening through deterrence, but rather you're using proactive enforcement with a smart contract, right? To summarize the answer, if a venture fund comes to us, they say, hey, this is my current version of the LPA. For example, one of our investors is a group here called Fresh Founders, LP. It's a venture capital fund started by a group of multi-time founders, and some of them have exited their unicorn companies. So they got this, micro fund together here in Ottawa, Canada, and they showed us their LPA, right? So we say, hey, look, okay, we're going to design a smart contract strictly in accordance with your governance structure. You as a GP, you have this, we bake that into the governance token. You as an LP, you have that, we bake that into the governance token. And GP wants to carry interest. Okay, that's fine. We can bake that into your GP tokens. I think that answers your question. Right?
I could talk to you guys all day, man. This is so awesome. I absolutely love this stuff. And LPA, you mentioned a few times, and for the viewers that don't know or are unfamiliar with the term, limited partnership agreement. And I just think what you're building is so awesome and so obvious, right? For the future, when you're building something, you're like, this is definitely going to need to exist. Why not me to build this, right?
Yeah. I would just want to say, when I was sitting inside my contract law classes, when I was sitting in my securities law classes, I was saying to myself, these contracts are basically saying if A, then B. Again, a lot of lawyers probably would hate me for saying that, but that is what a contract is. If A, then B. If C, then D. Bunch of logics. And I was like, why aren't people coding these logics into like software to save some time and some paper or some PDF storages, right? Yeah, just wanted to say that.
That's the definition of smart contract. That's the whole point. This is
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the GP side. Let's talk about the LP side a little bit. If someone just wanted to find a fund and join it as an LP, what are the stipulations here? Are they typical? Is it like they need to be an accredited investor? And if so, is this like a soul-bound token that I'm going to own that's going to prove my identity and say that I have accomplished this and now I hold this token and therefore are allowed to invest? Or are you leaving that up to like a KYC partner, for example?
So here's the thing. I think I'm sorry to give you like a very lawyerly answer here, but it depends. It depends on the compliance strategy of the fund that you're operating. So if you're doing through the private placement, private issuer exemption here in Canada, then of course you have to be a accredited investor. Or if you come up with other way, so for example, here in Ontario, the Ontario Securities Commission, which is Ontario's like the largest province in terms of economic activity here in Canada. So they just implement a new policy called self-certified investor. So basically for the people with proper educational background, such as the finance, commerce, law, accounting, even if they don't meet the accredited investor status, they can still invest in projects with an upper limit of 35,000 Canadian dollars. So that's like the exemption strategy you're able to use here in Canada. And I will also say this is that it actually makes a difference. I don't know if I'm going into way too much detail, but you have to look at the underlying asset of the fund as well. If the fund is holding securities purely, then of course your options are very limited. You have to go through the private placement exemption or file risk prospectus. But if you're in certain situations, your fund is, say, a project financing DAO, right? For example, you're buying a bunch of luxury villas in Mexico and you're generating rental income cash flow from those properties. Hey, those are not securities. Like a condo is not a security, right? So you can use a number of other exemption strategies to unlock your investor pool to maybe include people outside of the accredited investor definition, right? And I think, and also on KYC, on the matter of KYC. So KYC, I would say it has different implications in different areas of law. So it means differently when you're doing anti-money laundering. And also it means differently when you're doing securities law compliance, right? The government, different branches of government, they look for different things. I think like first and foremost, with respect to securities law, you have to make sure that your investor is either accredited or not. If they're not accredited, then is your exemption strategy that you're using, is it the right one? Or at the end of the day, you have some people that have access to a lot of financial resources. They might say, hey, I'm just going to file for a prospectus. I'm going to follow all the rules there is to issue securities and let the public retail investors hold it. That might cost them a lot of money to start, right? But people are doing it, right?
Yeah, just like Solve, this is an area I have spent a lot more time than I ever expected thinking about. I'm very excited about this, and we could go in so many more rabbit holes. But I want to touch on your process a little bit. You mentioned it here and there. And Aaron, maybe you can take this and walk us through how you work with potential funds or existing funds. You explained that you had a client, you have a client you worked with who had an existing LPA. Is that kind of the process you're following? Is it like white glove solution depending on what they're trying to accomplish, also based on the jurisdiction? Because earlier, Ben, you said it depends, right? And in this world, that pretty much is always the standard answer. So yeah, I would love to hear from you, Aaron, is what your process is today, and maybe what you're planning on, if there is a standard you're thinking of for the future, especially from your technical engineering side. Brain, probably you would love to get to something which is just by the click of a button, I imagine.
Yeah, so the onboarding process, Ben is more involved with onboarding the customers, but I would just describe what I did. Our smart contracts are quite general or like versatile, so that we do not, for example, a fund comes to us, we don't need to write new smart contracts. We just need to tweak those parameters for our smart contract. Like Ben mentioned, we have multi-class of tokens. You can define each set of tokens to do all sorts of different things. So, for example, we have the one of the very difficult, very complicated, and what we can achieve is like for every investment, just issue you investment tokens for that specific investment to the existing LPs, proportionate to the governance tokens they have. And then as time goes, those tokens belongs to the LPs. The LPs can come and leave. They have the tokens associated with those investments. And to be honest, we don't need to do anything with our kind of changing our core smart contracts. We just, for every investment, they deploy a new smart contracts, which automatically issue a set of new tokens to the existing governance token holders.
I gotcha. So this is slightly sidestepping or maybe opening quite an entire and different door, but I love incentive models, reward models, everything about it and how they work with DAOs and the potential for those in the future. Somewhere in your materials, I found, I think it was in your YouTube video, incentivizing investment deal sourcing. I would love for you to talk a little bit about that because, again, especially from a legal perspective, I have all kinds of red lights going on. How do you do that through Capita? You can maybe try to answer it both from a technical perspective as well as a legal perspective if you want.
I'll start with the technical answer. You can make it so every time there's a new investment deployed, the creator, proposer of that investment automatically gets some carry interest. This carry interest can be in the form of tokens, or eventually when the investment exits, you can get a portion of the proceeds as well.
Yeah, for sure. I want to start my answer with this quote that I love from Charlie Munger. Now, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. And I think at the end of the day, the success of a DAO, success of a company or a fund, at the end of the day, is driven by its incentive structure, right? So I think that's why I think Web3 is so sexy. It's because with like smart contracts, you can implement very creative incentive structures for people. And venture scouts, it's like a very traditional way of incentivizing people to deal source for the venture funds. Jason Calacanis famously was a scout for Sequoia Capital, which he sourced a lot of unicorns for them. And I think that it could be easier done with, you could do it way easier way with tokens, smart contracts, to incentivize venture scouts to deal source. And also another thing is that I think what Web3 and smart contract can do for you is that you could probably do it at a much bigger scale, right? So that, for example, you could have a lot more people who hold the scout tokens or whatever tokens you name them, and have them to propose deals to the fund for consideration, right? And I think that's a beauty of Web3. And now kind of like this is my default answer for compliance questions, is that we happen to have the contrarian view that the law is very clear for those who are willing to read it. Because the whole idea of securities law, laws regarding operating a money service business, they've existed for a long time to protect the market, to protect the stakeholders, and most importantly, to protect the common people. And we might not like them because at the same time, when they're protecting people, they're keeping a lot of people out of wealth creation opportunities, but they're there for a reason. So I think they've been doing this for decades. So I don't see there being any compliance issues if you're just playing within the framework of the law. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you, with Capita, also aid the due diligence process in your funds? Who does that? And is that somehow related to the incentive model, maybe? Or are you thinking about that? Because that's like the meat of it in the entire
Yeah.
investment process.
Yeah. So here's the thing. If you're making decisions on behalf of others in terms of capital allocation, you're acting in a capacity as a fund manager or a financial advisor, right? So I think that, yeah, a lot of people do that. You do need to file the proper registrations. If not, you need to check if there's like an exemption somewhere that, fit the situation you're in. But I want to bring your attention to how the syndicates are doing it, right? For example, I mentioned to you one of our investors is a syndicated fund here in Ottawa called Fresh Founders. It's a very interesting group of people. It actually started by the Shopify founder Toby here in Ottawa as a dinner club, and then over time it has evolved into a syndicated fund consisting of founders who have exited. So in that model, these multi-time founders, they build companies before, they build product before, so they have the sophistication and the knowledge and domain expertise to make capital allocations, to make bets on startups, right? So how they work is that they make their own individual decisions in terms of how much capital to contribute. And then they will combine their capital, write a single check, and deploy that capital as a group into a company like us, Capita, right? So in that model, I would say that the LPs made the decision voluntarily, and they're definitely not obligated to participate in certain investments if they don't want to. And they're allowed to have the flexibility of writing check in sizes that they feel comfortable with. So I think that it's very important to think about different operating models that you can implement instead of just a traditional, hey, we'll get a fund manager, we'll get a registration, and we make capital allocation decisions on behalf of others. I'm seeing a shift in the investing world today because of information is so readily available. The millennial generation, the Gen Z people, I think they're more active in terms of allocating their capital. Like my parents, they allocate their capital through mutual funds. They have professional fund managers making capital allocations on their behalf. But my generation and the Gen Zs, I think they want to play an even more active role in deciding where their money is going. So I think this is where our opportunity is to provide them that opportunity to create such sort of organization and deploy capital that way.
So I think a lot of people, they hear this sort of stuff, like we think it's fun, right? Especially like with the AI part and all that. But then you start talking about legal jurisdictions and all this stuff, and like you get in any sort of lawyer speak, and sometimes even just like technical smart contract speak. And some people are like, I just came here. I'm maybe interested in starting a DAO myself. I really like the concept, but man, I'm afraid to even start a DAO because I don't know if I'm breaking the law or not. For those types of people that are coming to Capita, they want to get involved, they want to maybe launch a fund or participate in some sort of way. Is there going to be some sort of onboarding process that kind of showcases, look, we're taking care of this for you and we're going to make sure you're compliant from A to Z, basically? And then just to add on a little extra to that question, is there any sort of jurisdiction that you guys are excited about in the United States or in the entire world that has been pretty friendly towards DAOs, that's taken an approach that you think is the most interesting that others could pay attention to? And I'll just lump those two questions together and hand them off to Ben, maybe.
I would say we took a page out of the playbook of some law firms onboarding process. First of all, we want to find out what are they hoping to achieve with their organization, right? Is it, do you want to purchase securities? Do you want to purchase non-security assets, paintings, RVs, recreational vehicles, or luxury villas in Mexico, right? And this would dictate, number one, your exemption strategy or your compliance strategy. Number two, the token smart contract features that you'll be getting. And I want to make it very clear that Capita is, at the end of the day, is like a technology service company. It's not a law firm. It doesn't provide legal advice. It doesn't provide legal services to anyone. Kind of just like my lawyer disclaimer here. But we do feel that the regulatory, let's say, people's lack of understanding of the regulations is definitely a barrier of adoption for smart contract enabled funds to take off. And we're actually very lucky is that we've been working with a tier one law firm in San Francisco who I would say they're really the experts in the crypto fund space, tokenized fund space. So they've been guiding us with their compliance strategy, and definitely we are using that in our product design. And so it is our hope that we want to play within it's not just our hope, it is our mandate to play strictly within the realms of securities law. And regarding your second question, I think in terms of friendliness to DAO and which jurisdiction is most friendly, I think at the end of the day, this should rather be interpreted as a business question. Do you want to be in Dubai or do you want to be in the US? I think at the end of the day, the United States is still the center point of global capital. And I think that some of the things that people think are unfavorable to crypto or unfavorable to DAOs, I think they're there for a reason, and they're there. They existed for decades, if not hundreds of years, because a lot of bad actors past have tried to be opportunistic about things and prey on the vulnerable. And I think it's very important to have that long-term vision. Say, hey, do you really need to go to some banana republic that has no law and set up your DAO, or you want to do it the proper way? Because at the end of the day, for Web3 to be adopted by mainstream finance, you have to get the buy-ins of institutional finance. And the only way for you to do that is to be a good actor, work with the regulators, and respect the law. Although you can try to push the limits of the law to the very extreme. And I think that Web3 and smart contracts can allow you to do that. But at the end of the day, just don't go exceeding the limits of the law. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, Aaron, I fancy myself a bit of a futurist. And you had mentioned like we're so lucky to be born like during this time with all this new stuff coming out. So it sounds like you've done some thinking. And if you're thinking about it, thinking about the future of this space, like where do we go from here? What do you think 10x is from where we are at this moment? How do DAOs exist in the very near future society?
Personally, that couldn't stop just thinking about the future, but as a start of a company, we also need to focus a lot on the near terms. But I definitely would love to share some of the thoughts I have. So essentially, I think in the future, the DAOs will be, people call it an internet native organization. I think that is the future. I think right now, like the DAOs are pretty simple or like premature and primitive in a way. I think down the road, it can be the de facto coordination tools for a group of people. Right now, I think you start a company, right? Start a C Corp. But I think the DAOs can be the de facto organization in the future.
The 10x question is always something where we're curious about for our guests. And the sister question to this for you, Ben, is what's the craziest idea you think should be a DAO?
We chat about this idea a lot, is that we think future nations could be built as a DAO, right? So you get a group of people together, you aggregate some capital, you purchase some land or some island in the middle of the ocean somewhere, or it could purely exist in the realms of internet like the Matrix, right? But it would have sovereignty recognized by other countries or even by the United Nations, right? So have people's rights encoded into smart contracts, right? So we think that that could be the final form of the evolution of capitalism into maybe like a DAO, right?
Cool. How can people get involved with Capita? Where do they go? How do they reach out or follow both of you? Ben, have at it.
Yeah, our website, that's how you can get in touch with us. So we actually have an intake form for you to fill out, and we would love to hear what type of DAO or what type of investment fund or syndicate that you want to build. So please make sure to reach out to us. And our social media handle, so for myself, it's bensu.eth. So I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, and also LinkedIn.
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is haobei.eth, HAOBEI.eth. So happy to connect and chat on Twitter.
Absolutely amazing, guys. Thanks for being on the show, and hopefully we will see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Looking
you
forward to it.
for inviting us.
And that's a wrap. Spin and Solve are your hosts for DAO Deep Dives, a podcast about all things DAO. Thanks for tuning in. Till next time.